Today, I have the honor of presenting to Representative Clark a citation from the Office of the Borough President. And I'm going to read it, and it reads as follows. Whereas it is a time-honored tradition to recognize those individuals and organizations that demonstrate an outstanding commitment to promoting excellence and providing outstanding services and support to local residents and those in need, it is therefore fitting that we join in acknowledgement of their special events and occasions, and whereas all Brooklyn joins together with administration, healthcare professionals, community supporters, constituents, and stakeholders of SUNY Downstate Medical Center to recognize and honor Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who proudly and honorably represents the 9th Congressional District of New York. And whereas, on behalf of all Brooklynites, I salute Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who was elected to the United States House of Representatives in November 2006, and who today represents the 9th Congressional District of New York City. I commend her for her stellar record as a public servant, which has included serving on the New York City Council, representing the 40th District in Brooklyn. I exalt her for dedicating herself to continuing the legacy of excellence established by the late Honorable Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American and Caribbean-American woman elected to Congress. I applaud her for her outstanding service on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the Congress, whereas she has held responsibility for consumer protection, food safety, and you know food safety is important, energy development, public health, communications, the environment, and interstate and international commerce. Please, that is a big responsibility. Please give her a hand for that. I'm taking my time with this woman. We don't get that much time with our congresswomen. We must honor that when we do get it. I congratulate her for being chosen by SUNY Downstate Medical Center as a recipient of the 2015 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Award. And I thank everyone present for all you have done to help our communities move forward as one Brooklyn. Now, please. Now, therefore, I, Eric L. Adams, President of the Borough of Brooklyn, do hereby confer this citation on Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke. As they say in Congress, I now yield my time to the distinguished representative from New York City. Welcome, Yvette D. Clarke.
Wow. Mike Harrell, let me thank you for that wonderful introduction and the presentation of the Borough President's citation. To all of our partners here in the room, let me start by thanking Kevin Antoine for all of his outstanding work in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Let me acknowledge our district leader and administrator here, Ms. Shirley Patterson. And to Mike Harrell and the team here at SUNY Downstate. To all of the students here present, wow, this is fabulous. You make it really great to be home. To the High School of Medical Professions, and to the Parkside Preparatory Academy, to the Brooklyn College Educational Talent Search Program, and to all of today's honorees, to Michael Antoine for your outstanding poetry. You're what they call a Renaissance man. And so it's great to be in your presence today. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone in attendance, a pleasant good afternoon to each and every one. It's my honor and my privilege to be here, to be a recipient of today's award, and just to be home. You know, Washington is a crazy place these days. And I call it the belly of the beast, but I call what I do a labor of love as well. Because I have one of the most fabulous constituencies in the United States of America, and it's an honor and a privilege to go and to speak and to fight on behalf of the people of Central Brooklyn. To the young people in the room, I want you to know that I went to public school before I entered my professional career. And I went to school right here in Brooklyn. I graduated from Edward R. Murrow High School. So Murrow, the best school in the borough. You didn't know about that. But I share that with you, young people, because I want you to know that, I'm one of you. I'm one of you. There would, quite a few years ago, I would have been sitting where you are right now. Because when I was younger, I had a role model in my life. And you heard about my mother, but there were many people who impressed me. One of those people was actually my doctor when I was a child. She was a pediatrician, and she was a black woman. And because I met her as a professional, I thought that one day I would grow up and be a pediatrician too. And so I studied mathematics and science when I was in my educational career in public school. And that led me to go on to college. So I want you all to know that you're going to find people around you who inspire you, and you should use that to find out more about them and what made them so successful so that you can follow in their footsteps and blaze your own trail. And there are a couple other things I want you to know that following your dream can enable you to do. It can enable you to do things that you never thought you were capable of doing. It gives you what they call courage. How many of you young people have courage? Oh, I can't believe that's true. How many of you are courageous? All right, well, that's a good place to start. That's a good place to start because that courage takes you in a lot of places. That courage is what drove Martin Luther King Jr. That ability to see beyond his fear and move towards his hopes and dreams. And he was inspired by a lot of people that were around him that were in similar circumstances. So I hope that those of you who didn't raise your hand about being courageous will be inspired by one of your classmates that is. I want to thank the Office of Diversity and Inclusion here at SUNY Downstate and all the dedicated women and men whose contributions support this institution for inviting me here to celebrate the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and for honoring me with your Leadership Award. I want to thank Reverend Sharon Codner Walker, a proud native of Jamaica, and Rabbi Yitzhak Holzman for sharing a word of inspiration with us this morning. Holly Mendelson of Insight into Diversity magazine, the Brooklyn Interdenominational Choir, and Carlos Medina, the Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the State University of New York. I want to again commend Kevin Antoine, the Assistant Vice President of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at SUNY Downstate, who was just awarded the Diversity Visionary Award. So we are here today to honor a man whose contributions to this nation and to our world have changed the course of history of our nation forever. He was a pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, a position he assumed at the age of 25. 25, that's young. That's very, very young. I know it seems old to some of you young folk in the room, but to someone like me, that's very, very young. He became a leader in the effort that continues to secure for the descendants of women and men who were held in bondage as slaves the full promise of American life. For his activism, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was described as a radical, an agitator, descriptions that today are applied to many of those individuals who refuse to submit to inequality in silence, to those women and men of courage who raise their voices, calling our society to its conscience. You have chosen for your theme today, What's Going On? Contemporary Struggle for Civil Rights. Despite substantial achievements in the 20th century, the achievements of which Dr. King's work was a critical part, there remain very serious problems with our civil society, ones that we must confront and contend with. Consider that the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a triumph for Dr. King and the civil rights movements, and depicted in the movie Selma, which allowed millions of African Americans who had been disenfranchised for centuries finally to participate in the political arena. Today, the Voting Rights Act only exists in form. The substance was gutted by the conservative members of the Supreme Court in 2012. Since that decision, dozens of states have enacted laws intended for a single purpose: to deny people of color the right to vote. Recently, we learned that the Department of Justice will not pursue charges against the police officer who killed 18-year-old Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Here we are in the 21st century, and stereotypes of young women and men who are of African descent, false assumptions about who they are and where they come from and what their intent is, continue to limit their opportunities and threaten their very lives. Yet we must persevere. We must persevere in our efforts to resolve these problems. Certainly, Dr. King persevered, remaining hopeful when his aspirations for our society seemed impossible to achieve. Even in the inevitable moments when all seemed homeless, he said, "Men who know that without hope they cannot really live, and in agonizing desperation they cry for the breath of hope." Dr. King remained hopeful, not because he was naive. He understood that to eliminate the inequities perpetrated under Jim Crow laws in the South and informally here in the North required that he focus the attention of the world on the reality of life for millions of African Americans who were deemed and denied the access to the American dream. The millions who could not buy a home or eat dinner in a restaurant or stay in a hotel, who were even denied the most basic rights of democracy, the right to vote. Dr. King did not ignore the problems. He refused to allow our nation as a whole to ignore the problems. But he also believed that when we have identified the problems, people of good faith have a responsibility, indeed an obligation, to work with each other to create change. Ever since the killing of Michael Brown on August 9th in 2014, a generation of young men and women who believe that we cannot, as a society, accept the incident or the strangulation of Eric Garner, or the shooting of Akai Gurley, or the killing of hundreds of unarmed young African-American men and women each year within our communities, and have called the people of the United States to their conscience. These activists have worked with elected officials and organizations based in our community to develop policies that will protect young African Americans from the threat of violence, and to eliminate entirely from our society the poison of institutionalized racism that remains the evil legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. Their work will change our nation. Or as we are visiting a preeminent medical facility in our community, let us consider the work to which many of the people here today have contributed to eliminate the substantial disparities that exist in healthcare. African Americans, often denied access to basic medical services, have subsequently experienced substantially higher rates of chronic disease and therefore higher rates of mortality. In the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, African American men have a life expectancy at birth of 71 years, 5 years less than their white male counterparts. As your representative in Congress, I have and share a responsibility to focus attention on the disparities that persist in the United States and around the world. When even basic resources are denied to families and children in our community, I can't remain silent. I'm proud to have worked with President Obama and my colleagues in Congress to create the Affordable Care Act, which has allowed 10 million Americans, 78,000 people here in Brooklyn, to access comprehensive health care. And I have collaborated with officials from the New York State of Health and organizations based in Brooklyn, such as SUNY Downstate Medical Center, on the implementation of this law. I also want to commend again the work of Assistant Vice President Kevin Antoine and the entire Office of Diversity and Inclusion here for your efforts to reduce healthcare disparities in this community. Brooklyn remains a community of diversity, of immigrants, of children and grandchildren of immigrants, people from every part of the world, people who speak different languages, have different cultures and religions, and we cannot allow these differences in language or culture to prevent anyone from accessing quality medical services. Your efforts to provide services in a manner and in a custom that people can understand, to recruit diverse professionals as doctors and nurses, are quite admirable. I have personal experience with the value of diversity in healthcare. When I was a young woman, as I said, my doctor was an African-American woman, and at a time when there were few African-American doctors and few women doctors, and very few African-American doctors, her example inspired me to pursue interest in math and science, an interest that continues to the present, as when in Congress, I've had the opportunity to work on issues such as cybersecurity, to work on the change in global climate and in healthcare. I want to thank you for providing many children here in Brooklyn with that same experience. When I look out at these young people and I see that you're giving them a lens into the world of healthcare, understanding that their talent and their skills can be applied in so many different ways. Most of us oftentimes think about our doctors, but there are nurses, there are allied healthcare professionals, all of which these young people will have exposure to, that will stimulate their academic careers and provide them with pathways for success in the future. You are all to be commended. As we focus our attention on the disparities that exist in our world, we must have the compassion to resolve those problems and to build the future of which Dr. King dreamed for his children and grandchildren and our children. Know that I will return to Washington, D.C. committed to supporting this institution, its dedicated workers, and the families and children who depend on their work. And know that as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I want the young people to know that right now, as I sit on that committee, I'm the only Black woman on that committee. Not only that, I'm the only Black woman in our congressional delegation from New York in Washington, D.C. But I expect that in generations to come, that won't be the case. That someone seated here today, perhaps one of these young people, will find gratification in a life in public service, and perhaps will be the successor and the successors of those who serve us in public office. But I wanted to share with you that it is important to really live Dr. King's legacy, that we not sit in the halls of academia or in the nice offices within our institutions, but that we organize, that we pay attention to what is taking place in Washington. And I can tell you that right now there's a big debate about how tax dollars are used, particularly in the area of Medicare, Medicaid, which people oftentimes forget are our tax dollars. And that fight is to look at how we re-engineer our healthcare system, how we make it sustainable for future generations, how we compensate our doctors who work in the most challenged circumstances, in what we call safety net hospitals, where many of their patients are not wealthy and rely on the benefits that we all pay into to have a civilized and morally strong civil society. And that debate looks at whether, in fact, we can make those changes and pay for them, and how we pay for them, and whose benefits get cut, and who suffers. And so it's important that if we are part of professional organizations, that we engage those organizations to amplify my voice in Washington, to make sure that whether you're an educator or you're just a private citizen, that you link up and let your preferences be known in Washington. Because all of these questions are going to be answered. And when they don't hear from the citizenry, things go amok. Things run amok. And right now, I think our society probably has the largest cohort of multi-billionaires than any other place on the planet. And those individuals will never be able to spend all the money they have in their lifetime. Every time they blink, as I say, it's another million. Every time they cough, another 2 million. And so when we look at how we go about restructuring not only our healthcare infrastructure, but the United States tax code, I think that people would like to hear from you. They'd like to know your thoughts. I certainly would, because I have my own inclinations. And I believe that there are ways in which those who have become extremely wealthy, not in a vacuum, but because we as a nation have supported their efforts through our hard-earned dollars, have a right and an obligation to bring some balance into the tax code, to not squirrel away inheritance for generations without giving back to those who have made them wealthy. And they can do that without ever seeing a decline in their quality of life. On the other hand, there are many of us who will see declines in the quality of our life if we have to continue to cut these benefits that have sustained life in our communities. So I wanted to drop that pearl of wisdom into this audience and hope that it resonates with you, because Dr. King would not want us to sit still and allow these things to happen in our society. He was an agitator. He was a radical. And he made the difference in all of our lives. We are the inheritors of his legacy. Let us stay true to that. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Right on time, wasn't it? So, tell you a little bit about the criteria for the Downstate Medical Center Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Award. Each year, the award goes to an individual or an organization that has demonstrated seeking societal changes to long-standing problems. This year, the 2015 SUNY Downstate Medical Center Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Award goes to Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke.
Thank you very much for this award. It's extremely meaningful, and I truly appreciate it.